Hello, I'm Robin Johnson. I'm here to present our continuing research documenting vernacular Irish cottages and other stone artifacts in Ireland's Cuilcagh mountain region. So now for a little geography. We're from Andrews University. It's in Berrien Springs in Michigan, about 2 hours from Chicago in the U.S., and not to be confused with another highly esteemed institution with a similar sounding name. And you're looking at Cuilcagh Mountain. One side of it sits the Republic of Ireland, and on the other side is Northern Ireland. And this is Ireland. And the lack of industrial development and intensive land use along the Northern Ireland, Republic of Ireland border has left this beautiful and once heavily populated landscape relatively untouched. However, artifacts are increasingly vulnerable due to the passage of time, economic pressures to consider, among other things, fracking and monoculture forestry. And there's the bittersweet effects of increased public accessibility and tourism from the region's new status as a UNESCO Global Geopark. The European Geopark Network, established in 2000, aims to protect geodiversity, promote geological heritage to the public, and support sustainable economic development through earth science-based tourism. Now, those areas in orange are special features of interest. And our interest in this region began under the influence of Gaby Burns and Jim Nolan with the exposure of archaeological remnants, boulder monuments actually, in the Cabin Burn region of the geopark. And their extensive documentation of these artifacts has just been published, The Burn Marlbank, a Prehistoric Monument Landscape. Now, as it happens, this region is also where two forms of the vernacular Irish cottage converge. One comes from the southeast, the more arable lands of Ireland with a milder climate, where farmhouses were generally oriented to support raising crops. And the other form comes from the northwest, the upland regions where soils were poorer, where farmhouses were generally oriented to support raising and protecting animals in an essential way. And these have a direct entry. Since the weather was wilder, the door was positioned away from the fireplace or the cooking hearth. As you can see, the red is the fireplace, the arrow is the entry. And you will also find that little notch in the wall, the bed outshot where the granny of the house slept near the fire. And the roof was a simple gable, and the entrance could admit animals, if necessary, for warmth or protection. And if there were doors directly across the room from each other, as there are in this bottom right image, and it's actually been closed in, as the second floor was added to that plan, that could be where a cow could enter for milking and then walk out the other side of the room. Now, the lobby entry form, where the land was drier and more arable, the farm was oriented toward tilling the land or raising crops, and spaces for animals were not within the house, but were in addition to it. The fire was protected from the calmer wind coming in the door by a small wall, which made a lobby, so to speak, sometimes accompanied by a little window opening, and the roof evolved from a hip form, which you can see up here in the top right. Now, our interest in this region began with the exposure of archaeological remnants, boulder monuments in the Cabin Burn. This year, our work focused on 3 sites, recording and investigating habitation sites and architectural remnants on both sides of the border. Monty Gashel includes a fine stone cashel, which is a secure enclosure, which accommodated both animals and housing, and dated from the early Christian era, with stairs and a covered entry, and a neighboring pre-hunger farmstead with remnants of a horse-geared milk churn and fine stonework by the Quill family. And there's Gort McConnell, which includes a sandstone boulder abandoned during an Iron Age splitting process, medieval and pre-famine dry stone walls, small rings of stone in the peat bog, multi-chamber and single-chamber tombs, and remnants of lazy beds, and 2 houses that appear to have been thatched cottages, one that was modified into the 19th century, and the bottom right shows that location looking at the rising plain below Cuilcagh Mountain. And the last site was like Nabraki, building remnants from later 1800s, early 1900s, recognizable as a house with fireplace mantel supports, and the most intact ruin appears to be a byre, or a barn for animals. And there's also remnants of medieval barn structure with several multi-chamber tomb sites and an abandoned lime kiln. So our interest in this region began with the exposure of archaeological remnants in the Cabin Burn, and we developed some useful photogrammetry techniques with animation that helped local researchers led by Gaby Burns and Jim Nolan, and they also caught the interest of the geopark director, who asked us to continue our documentation. So now I'll talk about our process. So this area in the white box is the Cabin Burn, and the insert was done by Gaby Burns from his book of boulder monuments of various types. And the white dot you see is a perched boulder monument, which we affectionately refer to as PB-48. We took pictures of it. We did classic archaeological stipple drawings of it. We took a series of photographs a consistent distance away from it and sent them to the cloud computing system of Autodesk and Project Memento platform and received a 3D image like this. We imagined the rocks had once been a single boulder and animated the pieces coming together using Autodesk 3ds Max design software, and this is a set of stills from that sequence. And this is the 3D model in red clay mode with both pieces together. And we can see how the top piece has a natural weathered surface and the bottom has additional work on it, gullies cut away on both sides of the center ridge. And there's evidence of a lithic percussion mark, that is, marks from stone tools being used to split the rock apart in the first place. Now this is the animation showing the boulder as we believe it was split by humans a very long time ago due to significant weathering on all the surfaces. So this is our current work, and these are the 3 regions, and a map by Gaby Burns here. So Montagashel has a series of different farmsteads. The more recent one that we investigated was near the road, near the bottom of the image. And then there was a string of pre-famine cottage buildings together, making up what we call a longhouse, which was more, I'd say, about a third of the way down on the map. And another small cottage out in the field near that, and then the cashel is highlighted with a green ring on the map here. Now we used a drone this year, which produced an incredible view of the cashel and plan. And you can see the narrow strips of the stone lintels over the entranceway in the image down below. And this is the video of the 3D model made using Autodesk Remake, which is the next generation of Project Memento that we used in the past. So the first cottage farmstead near the road was only recently abandoned, maybe within the last 30 years. But the fireplace bears similarities to older, more deteriorated cottages, and in particular note the sloped shape supporting each end of the fireplace mantle, which you can see in profile in the top drawing on the left. Now further into the landscape, past the cashel, was a very significant cottage, the Lawrence Coyle Cottage, with an intact fireplace and completely exposed stonework. And you can see the full shape of the stones with the sloping face supporting each end of the mantle. And you can see the whole stone mantle itself. It's a fascinating 4 to 6 inches thick and over 6 feet long and about 15 inches high. It's an incredible piece of stonework. And in the longhouse, the Lawrence Larry Coyle Cottage, the same shaped support stones, what I call shoulder or haunch stones, are still present, with crosses cut into the uprights framing the fireplace. Although the fireplace is much more deteriorated than it was in the previous cottage. But also, in this longhouse, the window and door openings in the stone walls had great examples of the typical cottage construction in the region. And this is that the openings were smaller on the outside of the building than they were coming into the room, which is true for both doors and windows. And in the drawing to the bottom left, you can see in the plan it's most evident where the side walls of the window are splayed, limiting the amount of wind that comes in from the outside, and then bouncing light into the room more effectively toward the inside. Now here's Legnabraki, the last region we looked at, and you see drone images of it and a plan sketch of the ruins as you see them today. And as you can see from the video of the 3D model, the cottage sits on sloping land. The family lived on the uphill end in the 2 rooms separated by a center wall with a fireplace on each face. One side of the wall was the kitchen, the most important room with a large walk-in sized fireplace, and the smaller room was a bedroom. Now, linear cottages like this first appeared about 1600, but their origin may go back to the raths and crannog dwellings of the ancient Celtic society or earlier, according to Walter Pfeiffer and Mara Shaffrey in their Irish Cottage book from 1990. So a linear house is 1 room deep, on average about 12 to 15 feet, and that's based on the typical length of available roof timbers. The cottage is rectangular and can grow in length as additions are needed. The overall measurements of this cottage, which we call the McTaggart cottage, are about 16.5 feet wide and about 47 feet long, and the walls are 22-inch thick. The most intact walls are the unheated portions of the cottage, the shed addition on the very end, and the barn next to it. The barn had a drainage trough cut into the floor so animal waste could easily be removed. So stone is the most common building material throughout Ireland, and the cottage was built of sandstone. Sandstone was gathered as freestone, often while clearing surrounding fields for cultivation. And lime mortar was used to seal the cracks between the stones and the walls. Broken pieces of limestone from the local outcrops of limestone bedrock would have been fired in a kiln and turned into lime. And the lime was mixed with sand for mortar, mixed with less sand for plaster, was used in pure form in multiple layers to coat the exterior and interior of the houses to help absorb moisture. Now, lime washing was effective as long as the hearth fires were burning. But once abandoned, the houses deteriorated much more quickly than the dried stone walls of the byres and the sheds. Note how the residential portion of this building is almost gone, while the non-residential end is much more intact. And you can see the step stone at the edge of the roof with the outer layer of stone raised high to protect the edge of thatch roof, which sat on the lower row of stonework. The well-dressed stones, finely shaped along the existing gable edge, reflect the high level of stonemasonry skills within the local population. And here we see Gaby's holding one of the angled haunch stones of the fireplace in the photograph. The upright is nearby, and the other pair of haunch and upright stones are to the left of the fireplace opening. And you can see from the opening in the stonework where the end of the haunch stone went into the wall. The top right shows how the shed stonework is not integrated into the cottage, so we know it was a later addition. Now, my colleague Ariel has done this beautifully exploded axonometric interpretation of how the cottage was, following the patterns of the farmhouses from the southeast of Ireland with a separate space for animals and a lobby entrance. Now, excavation down to the floor level or historical photographs could confirm exact door locations and confirm this interpretation. Now, according to the Ordnance Survey maps and the Griffiths valuations from the 1800s, only 3 houses were in the townland of Legnabrochy, and all of them were occupied by herds, which were employees of tenant farmers who lived in another townland. This cottage was last occupied by Mr. McTaggart, a herd, between 1930 and 1939, and has since been abandoned, so we call it the McTaggart cottage. McTaggart worked for the late Harry Sheridan's uncle, and Harry Sheridan's son John continues to farm today. So these and interpretive renderings by Ariel and Rhonda and other in-process drawings by myself are on display in an exhibition at the Marble Arch Caves Visitors Center through October 22nd. I hope you have a chance to look them over. My research partners Ariel Rhonda and I have been supported by Andrews University to do these investigations. We've enjoyed the involvement of Gaby Burns as a local historian and a map maker on our team, and Phil Mowat, the recent director of the Ulster American Folk Park in Omagh, Northern Ireland, was a consultant. Thank you.